So something happened in a federal courtroom that could turn into one of the biggest legal problems Donald Trump has faced in years. Because during sworn testimony, the Attorney General of the United States was asked a very simple question. Did the president order the destruction of evidence connected to the Epstein investigation? And what happened next stunned the entire courtroom. Pam Bondi didn't dodge the question. She didn't refuse to answer. Instead, according to people who were there, she admitted something that could potentially open the door to a federal obstruction case. And the moment those words came out, you could reportedly feel the entire room freeze. Because suddenly, this wasn't just another political controversy. This was a courtroom moment. And it may explain why Donald Trump is now scrambling behind the scenes.
President Trump was told by the Attorney General that he is in the Jeffrey Epstein files. He was told he was in the files 2 months ago, and then last week said, no, he wasn't. He was.
Now, before we get into what happened in that courtroom, there's something important to understand about the situation surrounding the Epstein files. For months now, there has been enormous pressure on the Justice Department to release documents connected to Jeffrey Epstein's trafficking network. Millions of pages of records, witness statements, flight logs, investigation files. And the question that keeps coming up is simple. Who exactly is mentioned inside those documents? Now, being mentioned in investigative files does not automatically mean wrongdoing, but politically speaking, it can still be extremely damaging. And according to several reports, Donald Trump had already been informed privately that his name appeared somewhere inside those files. But publicly, he denied it. Which is why the testimony that followed became such a huge moment. Because suddenly the issue wasn't just about the files anymore. It was about whether someone tried to interfere with the investigation itself. The testimony happened inside the courtroom of Judge Moss, and according to reporters who were present that day, you could feel the tension before the hearing even started. Because Pam Bondi had been trying to avoid taking the stand for weeks. Her legal team argued attorney-client privilege. They argued executive privilege. They argued that conversations between the president and the attorney general shouldn't be discussed publicly. But Judge Moss wasn't convinced. He ruled that privilege does not protect conversations involving possible criminal activity, which meant Bondi had to testify. And witnesses say the moment she walked into that courtroom, something immediately felt different. This wasn't the confident attorney general people were used to seeing at press conferences. She looked nervous. She kept glancing toward her lawyers. Her hands were shaking slightly as she took her seat. And everyone in that courtroom knew. Prosecutors were about to ask the question that had been hanging over this entire investigation. Then the moment finally arrived. The prosecutor stood up and asked Bondi a direct question. Did Donald Trump order you to destroy evidence connected to the Epstein investigation? According to courtroom reporters, the room went completely silent. Because if the answer to that question was yes, it could potentially mean obstruction of justice. Bondi's lawyers immediately jumped to their feet. They objected. They tried to stop the question from being answered. But Judge Moss shut them down quickly. He made it clear that Bondi had to respond. And that's when everything changed. Bondi answered. And according to several courtroom accounts, her response stunned everyone listening. She said the president had instructed the destruction of certain logs. Her explanation was that it was done for national security reasons. But the legal implications were obvious. Because destroying evidence during an investigation can fall under obstruction of justice in federal law. And suddenly, the hearing wasn't just about testimony anymore. It was about potential criminal exposure.
This was during a briefing on the findings of the Justice Department's review of the documents related to Epstein. That's according to sources familiar with the discussion. Those sources said the Justice Department's review found that the files appeared to include several unsubstantiated claims that they determined not to be credible, including those relating to Trump. Bondi also raised in the meeting that several names of other high-profile figures were mentioned, the official said. And it's worth noting that being mentioned in the files does not in any way indicate wrongdoing.
But the courtroom drama didn't end there, because prosecutors introduced another piece of evidence, an audio recording. Now, this recording had been circulating online for months. Critics claimed it captured Trump discussing the Epstein files. Supporters dismissed it as fake. But in court, prosecutors asked Bondi a simple question. Was the recording real? And according to reports, Bondi confirmed that the recording was authentic, which meant the testimony and the recording were now reinforcing each other. Two separate pieces of evidence pointing to the same conclusion. And that's when Judge Moss reportedly delivered a warning that made the entire room tense again. Because he told Bondi directly that the admission she had just made could potentially carry serious criminal penalties. Some legal analysts say charges related to obstruction could carry sentences of up to 20 years. News of the testimony spread across Washington almost immediately. Lawmakers began demanding answers. Legal experts started debating the implications on television, and behind the scenes, tensions inside federal agencies reportedly started rising. Because according to reports, even some officials inside the FBI were furious about how the Epstein investigation had been handled.
Colleagues Ken Delaney and Von Hilliard are covering this developing story since we've been on the air, and I want to share this update to their reporting. They report that Deputy FBI Director Dan Bongino is considering leaving his job after this heated confrontation with Attorney General Pam Bondi over his frustration with how the Justice Department has handled the Jeffrey Epstein files. That's according to a person who's spoken with Bongino and a source familiar with Bongino and FBI Director Kash Patel's interactions with Bondi. Quote, Bongino is out of control furious. The person who has spoken with the Deputy FBI Director said, quote, this destroyed his career. He's threatening to quit and torch Pam unless she is fired.
Now here's where the situation becomes even more serious, because Bondi's testimony doesn't exist in isolation. Earlier testimony from former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows reportedly described a very similar situation, which means prosecutors may now have two witnesses telling the same story under oath. In legal terms, that's extremely significant, because when multiple witnesses confirm the same sequence of events, it becomes much harder to dismiss their testimony as a misunderstanding. And that's why many legal analysts believe this case could escalate quickly. So how did Donald Trump respond when this news started spreading? According to reports, he went straight to social media. And instead of defending Bondi, he began attacking her. The same attorney general he had praised just days earlier suddenly became a target of criticism. He accused her of weakness. He accused her of giving in to pressure. And he suggested the entire situation was part of a political attack. But critics say this reaction follows a familiar pattern. Whenever someone close to Trump becomes part of a legal controversy, they often become the next person he publicly distances himself from. Right now, several things could happen next. Judge Moss has reportedly scheduled additional hearings related to the testimony. Congressional investigators are examining the statements made in court, and legal experts are debating whether Bondi herself could face consequences for her role in the situation. Because if prosecutors believe evidence was intentionally destroyed, that could open the door to a much larger investigation. And that's why this courtroom moment may end up becoming far more important than it initially seemed. Because what started as testimony in a single hearing has now triggered questions about the handling of one of the most controversial investigations in modern American history, the Epstein files, the destruction of evidence, and the possibility that some of the most powerful figures in Washington may soon be forced to answer even more difficult questions. For now, the legal process is still unfolding. But one thing is clear. The moment Pam Bondi made that admission in court, the stakes surrounding this investigation changed dramatically. And whatever happens next, this story is far from over.